Mr. Lee.
Let's go about Yemen and Burundi. I heard what you said about the talks in Kuwait. It was said that yesterday, actually, the Saudi-led coalition dropped bombs on Sana'a for the first time in some time. And there's also an Amnesty International report out, basically very detailed, talking about the use of UK BL 755 cluster bombs around Sadr. So I'm wondering, is the envoy, was he unaware of those? What does he think of airstrikes on the capital? There were people
I think
marking.
we obviously condemn all the continued violence we've seen in Yemen, whether it's airstrikes, whether it's attacks, terror attacks that we've seen even over the weekend. The message is clear: is that the focus needs to be on the political talks. We need to see a lowering of the violence. We're obviously very much aware of these issues. On the use of cluster, the reported use of cluster munition, I think the Secretary General and others have reminded that those countries who sell weapons and munitions to a third country have also responsibility on how those weapons are used.
Okay, and I guess on Burundi, I wanted to obviously the talks have started again. I've seen pictures of Mr. Ben Omar there, but there are a lot of the many people in the opposition, including the CNA Red Coalition, Mr. Pierre Claver Mpanimpa, who's spoken in this room. None of them are invited. So I'm wondering, does the UN think that the invitations made? It turns out that the Secretary General of the East African Community is a Burundian ambassador. So people are looking at the process and saying it's not an open one. Is the UN giving its blessing by Mr. Ben Omar being there, or is he protesting the limitations?
It's not about blessings or not blessings. These talks are an important first step in trying to deal with the current tensions in Burundi. It's obviously important that any dialogue, any talks, be inclusive and fully representative, and that the Burundians have a prime responsibility in finding a way forward for a peaceful and stable future in which human rights are respected.
Just one follow-up. I want to ask specifically about Mr. Mpanimpa, because he's a guy that's won human rights awards. He's clearly a nonviolent opposition figure. Has the UN asked that he should be there?
As I said, talks need to be fully inclusive. Carol.
Mr. Lee.
Cameroon and Myanmar. I don't know if you have anything on. There are at least two separate reports of a foreign police unit from Ghana that was supposed to be flying to UNMISS in South Sudan, being turned back by Cameroon for having wrong paperwork. How could that take place, and what is the outcome?
I haven't seen anything.
Okay, and I'm sure you have seen, and I thought you'd be asked about this Vice News expose about the UN's reaction to the killing of the Rohingya in Myanmar. It seems like there are a number of leaked documents they've obtained showing some of the I guess, proceedings of this senior action group of the Rights Up Front, including Mr. Eliasson. And basically they conclude that the UN has learned and improved little since the Sri Lanka incidents that gave rise to that. And they're talking about the SRSG, Renata Lok-Dessalien, basically having meetings when the human rights staff couldn't attend, so she wouldn't have to hear their views. I mean, have you seen all this, and what's your response to basically what's gone wrong?
We don't really comment on leaked documents. I think the UN for quite some time now has done its best to shine a light on the human rights issues we've seen in Rakhine State. There are also development needs. But this is an issue that the Human Rights Office has been focused on, this issue that the office as a whole has been focused on, and one that we've talked about quite a bit from here.
Right, but I guess it's just specifically, totally outside of the leaked documents, do you deny that the resident representative, Renata Lok-Dessalien, essentially tried to work around the human rights warnings? You're saying that the Human Rights Office is giving warnings. This says that she tried to specifically set up meetings when they weren't in the country.
I've no way of knowing what her personal time agenda is. I'm talking about what the views of the UN are.
Is the UN comfortable with this response?
I'm telling you what the views are from here.
Matthew.
I wanted to ask you, I know that Mr. Kim did a briefing for South Korean media, I guess last week, trying to say that the upcoming trip is in no way indicative of a desire to run for president by the Secretary General. But there have been other stories, including one, I don't know if it's today or yesterday, in the Korea Times, saying that several of the Secretary General's former associates still in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs intend to create a foundation in his name, saying that Mr. Yoon Chol is now the protocol officer of the president, and very much saying it's a 6-day trip, that it's hard to conclude that it isn't in some way related to the upcoming campaign. First of all, is Mr. Yoon now the protocol officer of President Park?
This may come as a shock to you, but I speak for the Secretary General and for the United Nations. I have a tough enough time keeping tabs on what people do in this organization that I don't know what people do
But I think
for the Foreign Ministry.
Okay.
I think your question assumes a lot of things. The Secretary General has made it clear that his focus remains and will remain on his job as Secretary General.
It seems fair to ask, is he aware, or are you on his behalf aware of attempts to set up a foundation in his name?
I'm not aware.